Bridget, would you like to begin?
Sure. And hi, Rihanna. So great to see you again. And hey, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I hope that you're doing well, your family's doing well. I hope that you're finding time to binge some Netflix shows, because I know that I am. To give you guys a bit of context, the Econ department is very near and dear to my heart. So I guess back up, I'm from California originally, went to University of Wisconsin, graduated in 2018. And while I was there, I actually worked at the Econ department with Elizabeth and Ilsa. So fast forward, I've been working at Goldman Sachs for the past 2.5 years. And I would say, if you remember one thing that I say from this entire meeting, I don't care if you don't remember everything else, although I hope that it's actually helpful to you. Like, if you do not know Elizabeth and Ilsa, set up a time to meet with them, go in, have them look at your resume, your cover letter, like talk to you about kind of what you're interested in. Like, I would not be in this seat today if it wasn't for those two people. So just, that's my public service announcement just at the beginning. But as I was saying, I've been working at Goldman Sachs a little bit over 2 years now. I work in an area of the firm called Global Markets, which some of you might know as sales and trading. An investment bank is a very big place, so can get into like what exactly that means. But I work in a certain group called the Equities Electronic Trading Group, which is really just a fancy way of saying that I help our clients to trade in the US equities markets. So let's pretend that you are Rihanna Capital Management, launching maybe in the next few years, keep an eye out. And you're like, I think that Nike is a really, really cool company. And I think that I would love to invest in it. And so you might say, you know, I want to buy 1 million shares of Nike. So Rihanna would call me, or she'd ping me, and she'd be like, hey, Bridget, I want to buy 1 million shares of Nike. I'd be like, that's awesome. Do you want to do that in a day? Do you want to do that in a month? Do you want to do that in the next 10 minutes? And kind of based off of what Rihanna's investment objectives are, as well as her trading objectives, then I'm able to help her actually trade that in the market. So can get into more details later, but that is a little bit about me. So Emily, do you want to go?
Great. Hi, thank you all for having me. Excited to be here. If you hear my husband being loud on the phone, I apologize. The COVID world that we live in. Emily Green. I graduated from Wisconsin in 2009. It does not feel that long ago, but I guess it was. I also am in New York City. By background, I was obviously an economics major. I then actually moved to London, and I worked for a brokerage firm there called Cantor Fitzgerald, which is a New York-based brokerage firm, before I moved on to JP Morgan, which I worked at for 7 years. And so I did work a lot in traditional finance. I went through the traditional programs that the banks host, the analyst, associate to VP programs that they host, similar to Bridget would have it at Goldman Sachs. And then I totally changed my life, and I now run private wealth for what is essentially a startup financial firm. And so it's totally different than most things you probably have heard of. But so I work for Ellevest, and so I run their private wealth business. We are a company we're actually a mission-driven financial firm with a mission to close the gender money gaps. So the fact that women have less money, they invest less money over time. This causes all sorts of things, that women live longer, all these things that we look at. So we all talk about the gender pay gap, but there's a huge gender investment gap. And so my CEO is a very famous woman on Wall Street. She was CEO of Merrill Lynch and Smith Barney, and she's CFO of Citibank. And she left to start this business really as a digital only firm. So it was for the person with $5, with $10,000. And myself, working in traditional finance, I came over a little over 3 years ago now, when they had nothing in private wealth. I was literally the first person in it. I always joked to her that she really lied to me, and I didn't really understand that I had to literally create a business. But I created a business. So I created our private wealth business. I run it. So day to day, I manage the business. So I decide, I got out of a 3-hour meeting earlier today of just what's our strategy for next year? Who are we, I'm getting the product people aligned, the engineers, our design team, all those things to align to our business, and making sure that we're going to those private clients, which are people with $1 million or more, to invest. but I am also a financial advisor on the team. So I do 2 full-time jobs. So I also manage money for people. I have clients who range from $1 million to $50 million. And I decide how they're investing, help them achieve their goals. And we do kind of another layer at Ellevest where I help them to align their values to their money. So I help them to think about, if you care about women, how do I align your money to women? If you care about climate change, how do I align that? So I kind of have 2 daytime jobs that I do, which is kind of fun, kind of crazy within there, but always happy to talk about both and more in either of those.
Cool. Thank you, guys. I'm super excited to hear what you guys have to say. Real quick, I just want to second what Bridget said. If you haven't gotten in touch with Ilsa and Elizabeth yet, I highly recommend doing so. They're so helpful. And I wish I reached out to them sooner, being a junior. But yeah, so Emily, I'll start with you for our first question. What drew you to choosing economics as your major?
So honestly, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I left high school and I was really good at math. And I always took the AP and the accelerated math courses. And actually one year I went to a very good high school in Chicago, and I was always in the accelerated kind of programs there. And I kind of went to college and I was this is life thing. You kind of go to what you're good at in general. So I was I'll either be an engineer or I'll do finance, econ, we'll see kind of what I do. I wanted to do something with numbers. And I remember I went to SOAR, and, they're kind of what classes, I have no idea what to do. And they told me I took an English class, psychology, which I absolutely hated. I was horrible at that. I was okay, this is not meant for me. And I took French. And Econ was a random thing. It's something I never would have done. It was just the person who helped me sign up that was you should take this. And I was I'm good at this and it makes sense. And I like that it has to do with the world and it helps you kind of think about things. And so I took, the next econ, I took macro, micro, and I just kind of kept taking them, but I don't know if it was really on purpose. I was I'm good at this. I'll take another course. It doesn't make it so hard to kind of do this. But the more and more I got into it, I also, you have to remember, graduated in 2009. And so in 2008, it was super interesting then to be doing this because the world was literally crumbling around us. People were is the stock market going to go to zero? What is going to happen in the world? And it's really interesting at that point to see how these levers are pulled and what matters in the world and how each place is affected by the other and these types of things, and actually being able to understand that in real world life scenarios. And so it was kind of by happenstance, but and I was really glad I did. And it was very interesting. And I think it's actually, when I'm not talking to econ people and they ask me what they should take in college, I always tell people they should take macro and micro economics. Just I don't care if you're an art major. I just think everyone should take them.
Yeah, cool. I totally resonate with that. I kind of just took econ just to take it. And then I ended up really liking it. So it's cool how that happens. Bridget, how about you?
So I was similar in that I came in and I was I'm not really sure what I want to do. I think for me, I came in with this very ambitious, I was I want to study econ and math and science and writing and all these things. And I was I'm going to be this writer, philosopher in space, solving math problems and all this stuff. And my mom was you're only going to be there for 4 years, hopefully. So maybe narrow it a little bit. But I kind of I similarly kept taking classes that I was okay, what do I like? And I was okay, I like this econ course. I'm going to take another one. I'm going to take another one. I'm going to take another one. And I just really felt every course that I took, I was I feel this is giving me a nice framework of understanding how the world works and understanding how to take a very, very complex problem and kind of be able to dial away all of the tiny little mumblings about it and say, okay, what's the big picture problem here and what are kind of the smaller details and how do they connect? And how can I tell a story about this? So it was this nice merriment of econ and then math for the more quantitative side that I liked. And I actually also took a lot of creative writing courses. So it also kind of ended up being one of those things where it evolved into, wow, as it turns out, I love econ because to me, it felt like being able to study everything because you're looking at this really powerful intersection between there's economics, there's politics, there's social implications, there's historical. So you get kind of a little bit of everything. So in a way, it feels like I was able to basically like make my 18-year-old self proud and tell her like, that's exactly what you sought out to do. And that's what you did.
Yeah, that's a great way of describing econ, because like I was all over the place. Like I have so many academic interests and I didn't know how I could combine them. Like can't like triple major, can't like get all these degrees at once, but econ like really combined all of my interests. So as you're both econ majors and working in finance, do you find that a lot of people have similar academic backgrounds to you guys? Like Bridget, are there any creative writing majors at Goldman? Something like that?
You know, I haven't stumbled upon them, but I'm sure there's somebody out there. I would say that something that I was like very surprised by when I stepped into Goldman, and backing up too for a sec, like I never thought that I was going to be in finance, like never, ever, ever. And I kind of ended up down this path of, okay, I really like econ, particularly economic development. I really like to write. What are roles that I could do that would be similar to that? So Ilsa kind of helped, not Ilsa, Ilsa helped me down the road, but I sat down with Elizabeth and I was like combing through Buckingham. It was like April, like everybody had internships already. I was like, I want to try and find something that is a little bit more of what I'm looking for. I ended up working at a hedge fund and doing research analyst work for them. So that was kind of like my first step into finance, and I guess kind of deviating, but I guess the point there is like, I had this kind of chip on my shoulder of nobody else is going to be an economics and math and creative writing person. Like nobody else is going to be from this really large public university. Like nobody else is going to understand this, but whatever it may be. And then I got into Goldman, and the thing that I was so blown away by is that so many people that I've met here there's of course like the more traditional path of, you know, finance majors. Like I met somebody in my internship who told me that he has been wanting to be a Brazilian bond trader since he was 10. And I was like, I don't know how you knew what a bond was by then, but I like to each their own. And then I met the person who was a philosophy major and the person who was a music major, and these people who didn't have the same kind of trajectory that I had always expected. But I think too, I always saw the things that I kind of saw as the weaknesses in terms of, well, I felt like I didn't have this background in finance. I felt like I didn't come from this Ivy League, very prestigious school. Like the things that I thought were weaknesses, I ended up coming in and I was like, oh no, this gives me a different perspective. This actually sets me apart from people. This actually makes me much stronger in the opinions that I have to bring to the table. So I guess to actually answer your question, there are a lot of traditional backgrounds. I have been surprised by how many people have more interesting backgrounds than I would have otherwise expected, and are from all over the world too.
Cool. I was surprised to hear you say that, because I thought like finance world would be mostly like business school students and something like that. And that's like, I was nervous applying to internships for that same reason. Emily, have you found that to be the same?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends. You know, the people that like do my job tend to come from finance, economic type of backgrounds for sure. But I think what's like a misnomer in general that I always like at Ellevest, it's crazy to think because we were a financial firm. But if you actually look at like the amount of, okay, actually just take my CEO. She's the most powerful woman who's like ever worked on Wall Street before this woman became CEO of Bank of America. She was CFO of Citibank. She's CEO of Merrill Lynch. She holds all the power, but like she was a journalism major. Like this is a woman, and like back in the day, number one, being a woman who was like in the C-suite of a company, like she didn't major in finance and do this. She was a journalism major who just happened to like move to New York City and work for an investment bank and somehow became the CFO of Citibank. But I think that there's so many different roles. I mean, she worked really hard, but there are so many roles that aren't actually like so finance focused that actually most of my colleagues aren't people who like actually directly work in finance. And it's actually interesting. Like the people I actually specifically look for, like if I'm getting like a product person, I have two product people who like work with my team. One worked at Goldman Sachs. So she has all the like traditional background and such, and she's a finance major. And one, I like to have completely different role, because I think also we always look for at Ellevest, like people who have different thought processes than someone who has had the exact same process. Because if you only hire people who are finance majors from Penn, you're just going to have all the same people. Your business is not going to have any different types of thought on that. And so just making sure that you actually have, like stay away from groupthink type of thing and get these different ideas and actually be able to like build a business, especially for someone like me who's building a business from scratch. When you look at this. And so that's always important to me. It's funny, Bridget says the thing about like the fancy schools and things. When I first worked at JP Morgan, it's definitely like was a thing that you're like, I went to Wisconsin and then like everyone else went to like Penn and Harvard and this and like, and I did this. And by the time I was in charge of hiring people, I was like, I do not want to hire an analyst from one of these fancy schools because they do not work hard. And like, literally I would tell people this. I'm like, I want the kid from IU. I want the kid who went to Iowa. I want the kid who went to Wisconsin. Like, I do not want that kid who went to that fancy school because you know what, they're going to come in. And I really did do that. Like, I was like, I hired my analyst from when I worked at JP Morgan, came from IU, and really thinking about that. And so I think there's just this like different mentality. And I think don't kind of like take that away from yourself ever and feeling like these places are so elitist that is a thing. I know it's kind of like something that they maybe try to portray. But if you actually kind of like pulled back the hood, and I think the people who are the most successful like in these places might not have been the finance major, might not have gone to Harvard, might not have been these people. It's the people who worked hard, networked, and got themselves into the right place and actually thought about these things. And so while there's lots of people who have these traditional backgrounds, if you have a business and everyone is the same, you're not going to be successful. That's just it. And so businesses need to be thinking about that. So always use what your differentiators are, because companies want you to be different at this point. They don't want 100 of the same person to hire for those roles.
Cool. Awesome. I love the way you put that. That's a great way to think about it. It seems we have a lot of juniors and sophomores in the crowd. So as a junior myself, nearing graduation, I personally still have like no idea what I want to do. I know I'm interested in econ, but like, I honestly don't even know what that entails. And I feel like others are probably feeling the same way. Emily, could you tell us about how I'll rephrase, begin. When did you know what you wanted to do after graduation? And how did you figure that out? Were there any resources that helped you along the way? It's kind of a jam-packed question, but answer what you can.
So you have to remember, I might have a similar situation to people who are like graduating this year. I kind of graduated at a time then like I didn't really have a choice. It wasn't like every company was on a hiring freeze. I graduated in 2009, like literally everywhere was on a hiring freeze. Everyone was getting fired. Like, it's kind of a similar situation than today when you look at this. And so it was kind of like, okay, the shoe dropped the fall of my senior year. Like everyone who had gotten jobs even that were a year before me, like got fired because they laid off like all those people. And it was kind of like, all right, now what do I do? And I kind of knew I wanted to work in like the financial markets and things in general. In some way, I don't really think I like ever knew how to figure out what I knew wanted to do. So I actually ended up going on a postgraduate business program to London, which is how I worked for Cantor Fitzgerald. But I was kind of like, it was a great experience just to be like, what do I want to do? It was like half real world, half not type of thing. Like you worked full time, but like I lived in London and like had fun and traveled the world. And, it was a great way to kind of come into this. And then I kind of had to come back to Chicago and be like, all right, now what with this? So, it's definitely wasn't the easiest thing. I'd say like everything in my career though, it wasn't like, I was like, yeah, I know what I'm going to do next. Like, even when I got a job at JP Morgan, and frankly, it was still like the recession, times were crappy. And I had met a lot of people. I came to New York and I met a lot of people. And a woman called me like 2 months later and was like, actually, I know I was introducing you to other people, but like I have a job. And so I worked for her. It wasn't my ideal job, but I knew it was a good bank. It was JP Morgan. I was like, I knew I'm going to kind of get somewhere with this and maybe I can figure it out. And then, I worked hard. I did a good job. And one of the MDs, the managing directors I worked for, was moving to the private bank. And like, this was not purposeful again. He was like, do you want to come with me? And I was just kind of like, I thought about it and I was like, all right, like I like him. I want to work with clients. I like the markets. That's like kind of what I've always liked. So, okay. And so, you know, I always think like taking chances, but like you could plan out your whole career today. That's not what's going to happen. Like things will come up, things will happen. And so kind of being open to the opportunities and things that come to you. But I also think just in the world we live in now, like being a person who graduated in a really crappy time, you need to be like really open to just being like, you know what, this is not exactly what I wanted to do with my life, but I will figure out what I like and don't like from this job. And then I can take that and do more from there and always like learn something in every role. I think it's really important when you're like graduating in these really weird worlds.
Yeah, I feel like it's great to just like take every advantage you have as a learning opportunity. Bridget, you mentioned that you had an internship earlier. I was wondering if that was, I know you had an internship at Goldman, but I believe it was a hedge fund you mentioned before. When did you, I'm assuming it was like your sophomore year, but if it wasn't, when was that? And is that common for people to get internships their sophomore year? When do you find that people begin their internship search process?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so I was looking, so this would have been my summer going into my junior year. Yes, because then my summer going into my senior year, I was interning at Goldman. So I would say that as far as like what is like common, I think it also depends on kind of like what career ideas you're looking at. Like for me, I was like, I need a job. I need to be able to pay for things. I'm going to look for something that is hopefully kind of aligned with what I have. I actually had an internship that I was prepared to take back home in California. But I was like, you know, this really isn't aligned to kind of the things that I'm more interested in. Like I was hoping I could maybe find something for economics, maybe a little more quantitative. And so I took a leap of faith and everybody was like, it's April, you're not going to find anything. Like you've missed the cut. You can't do it. And I was like, you know what, I'm going to send resumes out to a bunch of people anyway. I ended up sending resumes to roughly 22 companies, some of them hedge funds, some of them writing firms, some of them like legal firms. I don't know. I was everything across the board that you can imagine. And they were the only one that actually responded to me. And they were the only one that gave me an interview. And then go through this super rigorous, like 8 people interview process. And bear in mind, I did not know what a hedge fund was at the time because I, again, was not familiar with finance. And so I was telling my mom about like, that's so weird. Like 8 people are interviewing me. And she was like, that's because it's a hedge fund. I was like, no, that's not what it is. It's an investment advisory firm, Mom. So listen to your parents. But for me, I think that process looked a little bit different. It just kind of depends. But I guess speaking on the investment banking side, again, was a bit naive, did not realize that the internship process for investment banks is getting pushed further and further forward. And so for my internship going into the summer after junior year, so going into senior year, I actually applied for that the December prior. And I ended up applying online. I was planning again to go back to this hedge fund. I worked for them through school. I loved them there. And I was like, you know what? Like, I wonder what a big bank would be like. Like, I have no idea what this could be like. I'm going to send in an application online. Why not? Again, sent it to 15 top investment banks, only heard back from Goldman. Did the interview then while I did a higher view interview, which is kind of like a video interview, and then ended up doing a super day interview all online when I was studying abroad. They called me and were like, you should come to New York and interview. And I was like, I'm in Bangkok right now. So I know, Rihanna, I've told you this before, but I ended up doing these 3 different video interviews in which my Wi-Fi cut off after the second one at 2 a.m. in Bangkok in my Thai student uniform. And the reason why I tell you guys all this is because I always thought that the timing would be perfect of when I got a job opportunity, of when an internship came along. Like sometimes the timing isn't always opportune, but if it's there, like there's an opportunity, like go for it and apply. And I remember getting kind of discouraged when I kept hearing no, but you could hear 50 no's. And if you just need 1 yes, like that's literally all you need. And so kind of bear that in mind too, as you're going through this internship process. Part of interviews is learning about the job and if you want to do it. And, you know, you might interview for a job, get all the way through and be like, I don't know. like that's part of the process. Does that answer your question, by the way?
Yes, totally. And I have a follow-up actually. So were there any resources or strategies that you utilized at UW to help with your internship search process?
Yes. So as far as the internship search process, this is something also like Elizabeth and Ilsa are pros at, so reach out to them. But there's a couple different things that I would say. One, BuckyNet was hugely helpful to me when I was looking for this hedge fund position. And oftentimes, like the guy who ran the hedge fund there, his name is Ryan. He now works at this company called Outpost. But he was like, hey, I literally only posted this job opportunity on BuckyNet because he went to Wisconsin. He was like, I wanted to hire an alum or I wanted to hire a student there. Like I only posted on there. So like, these are people who like want to hire Madison students. Keep that in mind. BuckyNet. Second thing would be LinkedIn. LinkedIn is your best friend when you are networking or when you're looking for people like Emily and me who work at companies that you're interested in and want to hear more about. And also, I remember like panels like this were so helpful. There was a night on Wall Street that Elizabeth hosted. It was my, I want to say sophomore or junior year. And it was with like these several people from Goldman. And I was like, wow, that looks really cool. I'm sure I'll never be able to be there, but that would be a cool room to be in. And lo and behold, it ended up introducing me to, hey, Goldman Sachs is someplace that other people from Wisconsin have worked at. So I think those are BuckyNet, LinkedIn, and panels and events like these that are going on are just an absolute yes. And so I would say those three things, talking to your network and just talking to people and getting a sense of like, if you think something's cool, like you can find somebody in that industry. And if you can't find somebody, like Elizabeth can help you, Ilsa can help you. Like the school has so many resources, and I would say just like make sure you're taking advantage of them.
Yeah, agreed. I wish I took advantage of our resources way earlier, but better late than never. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Kind of shifting a little. Sorry, Emily, if you want to start with this one, the question is, what do you recommend students should focus on while they're in school to be competitive for internships or jobs? Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely thinking about not only the coursework you take within your major, but outside of it, and just trying to be thoughtful about it. But I also think like do things that you like, because that's what you're going to be good at within there. If you're trying to force something upon yourself, you're probably gonna, you're trying to live a life you're not going to like, and you're going to take all these courses. It's going to be really hard for you probably. And then you're going to get to a point that you're like, I didn't even really want to do this. You hear this from a lot of like people who say they're going to be doctors and then they take like biology and then they're like, just kidding. Type of thing. But I think that, being smart about that, I think if you want to work in finance, again, this is something I think like literally the American government should like make everyone who goes to college take, but I think everyone should take an accounting course. I think like I took Econ 100 or whatever it was. I think it's just like, honestly, even if you want to be an entrepreneur or something, I think it's just like a useful thing to understand how accounting works. Some people, I like accounting. I think it's really easy for me. It's rules. You just have to like, and it has to add up at the end. I know it's not always the easiest thing for people, but, I think that is always a good thing to focus on. And then just kind of being strategic about thinking about that. I do think that internships are important for these finance types of roles and kind of what you've done before. I do get that it's like internships can be something for people of privilege. And I'm totally aware of that. People always like the finance department actually always contacts me, even though I wasn't a finance major, because I think I'm like the woman who does something like sexy in investments. So I'm like their person that's like, oh, there's this woman in investing. But, I remember when I first met with the woman and she's like, well, how did you get your internships? And like, I'm very aware I'm from the city of Chicago. I'm very aware I went to a high school that people's parents were like plugged into places. Like, I know that it's not like the easiest thing in the world, but I also am aware that like I had opportunities at Wisconsin. So like, for instance, I took there's a course, it's like Econ and finance course. I think it's like 300 or 310 or something. And it's about financial markets. And because I did so well, actually the professor came to me and was like, hey, do you want this internship in Madison this summer? Do you want to do these types of things? I didn't do it because I had an internship in Chicago. But I think if you actually show the work that you want to do and types of things, like opportunities do come up. So I think that, I never discount working hard. Being in the right place at the right time is always helpful, but I always think that also just working hard gets you places and helps you people to see you, think about that, but also just kind of like showing that you do things outside of just your normal day to day, frankly, is kind of like, it's just like when you're getting into college, it's like you have to do all these things now. It's kind of like life. Showing that you have interests and focusing on other things is just an important thing as well. But again, look, doing things you want to do, not things because someone said that looks good for you. Finding things that you're like, I enjoy this and I want to do it, I think is just a theme to kind of use throughout your whole life. And that'll help you kind of on your path to success. You'll find people, if you're doing something you like, even if it doesn't have to do with your major, you might meet someone and they're like, I met them through sailing. And they're like, I actually know this role for you because I'm doing this. And you had no intention of going into sailing thinking that, you were going to get this job. But, things like that will happen because you find people in your life, and that's kind of how life will go for forever. So I think just always finding those things around you that aren't just academic to help you with that too.
Cool, thank you. It looks like we have some great questions in the chat. Bridget, if you knew at the start of your college career that you would end up at Goldman Sachs, would you have pursued a finance major?
No. And first off, I probably would have, if like me currently called my 18-year-old self and was like, you're going to work at Goldman Sachs, like I probably would have laughed at her and I would have been like, yeah, right. But I wouldn't have taken finance because when I think of kind of the path that I ended up taking, like Emily said it perfectly, of like taking courses that you're interested in. One, you end up doing better in them. And two, you end up just enjoying learning a bit more. So like staying up really late and studying for an exam doesn't feel as much of a burden when you like it a little bit more. And like when I look at over the 4 years, I mean, I had no idea kind of where my path was going to go, but I was like, I'm going to keep taking classes that I like. And for me, I was like, all right, I'm going to take a creative writing class. I'm going to take economic development in Southeast Asia. I'm going to take economic development in Latin America. Okay, it looks like there's a study abroad opportunity that could come up. Like I'm going to get internships that I can pay for that. And then I'm going to go and study in Bangkok for 6 months and see what that's like and study Thai economic development. Like, does me studying Thai economic development help me in a trading seat? Like, not exactly. But what it did show me is, I remember too, like we were traveling all around and I remember flying from Bangkok to New York and I flew straight for my internship because I didn't expect to get the internship at Goldman. So I didn't pack any clothes. I didn't prep for anything. So I was like, okay, I bought clothes in Thailand. And then I got on this plane. I flew from Bangkok to New York. I landed. And then I started the internship 2 days later. And I walked into the room and I was jet lagged out of my mind. But I remember being like, it was a very stressful environment, and I won't say that it wasn't, but I remember for all this stress, it was very like intense and all this stuff. I was sitting there and I was like, people are speaking English? Like, this is incredible. Like, wow. And I think like it just gives you a different perspective and it gives you a different reference point when you're able to try and learn about different things, and it makes it kind of more comprehensive. And I think I carried that then into the internship of saying, is this team, like, to set the stage to, like, when walking into this internship for sales and trading, there's a bunch of different floors at Goldman. 4th floor is equities, 5th floor is fixed income, currencies, and commodities. And when you walk onto this floor, it is a completely open floor plan. And it's like 700 seats and just rows and rows of like monitors and people. So it's kind of like a daunting place. But walking in there being like, I'm just going to learn as much as I possibly can. And if that's cool, I'm going to keep going down that path. And if I think this is interesting, I'm going to learn about that. And I think going through college or even just like life since then, being like, is this interesting to me? I'm going to follow it. I'm going to follow that thread and see where it leads me. Because you could be that the guy who was sitting next to me in the internship who was 10 years old and was like, I'm going to be a Brazilian bond trader. Turns out he did the internship. He liked equities. Like, so you set a plan and it changes. And so I think being open to the fact that it's going to change and I'm going to expect it to change. And I'm just going to see kind of how things play out, has made me a lot happier and has served me well, just even in the past couple of years.
Yeah, I'm such a planner myself. And so like going into college, I was like, I'm going to be a doctor. And then I'm going to go into like, I was going to be a lawyer. Like law school was my dream. And then I like got it. Yeah, I just like change from so many topics, just back and forth. But it's good to know that other people are doing the same thing and just knowing you have to go with the flow. I want to get to the other questions in the chat, but real quick, if you could just like rapid fire answer this, Bridget, how, if possible, how did you prep for your interviews, especially the hire view? I know those are, from my own experience, those are pretty daunting. And I honestly don't know how you aced that Goldman interview, jet lagged. So clearly you were very well prepared. If you could just give us a few of your tips.
For sure. So for the hire view interview, so that one I did right before leaving for Bangkok. So I was actually in my apartment in Wisconsin. But so hire view interview, and so to give some background, hire view interview is a video interview. So basically, a lot of the firms now will do a video interview first prior to interviewing you live. And they will ask you a question. You'll have 2 minutes, you'll have 30 seconds to prepare and then 2 minutes to deliver an answer. So what I did for that, and I am an over-preparer to a T. So what I did is I would open up Photo Booth and I would practice answering questions. You can find them on Wall Street Oasis. You can find them on all these different websites. If you just search like common investment banking questions, common sales and trading questions, like there's resources there. I looked at them. I compiled like this massive, massive list. I wrote out answers that I thought would be interesting. And then I just filmed myself on Photo Booth over and over and over and over again. And I watched myself. And as it turns out, I might have done this actually while we were speaking, but when I then watched it back, I realized, wow, when I'm thinking and I don't know the answer to something, I tend to look straight up. And that is a very strange visual if you're watching a video. And so being able to capture that, being able to do your look at Photo Booth and watch these videos over and saying, did I really tell them something about myself? Because it's not just answering the question, it's, did you give them another reason to say yes to you? Did they learn a little bit more about Rihanna and like what she's about? So another thing that I did for the hire view is I wrote down, because you don't know what questions you're going to get, I wrote down, there's 3 things that they must know about me before we leave this interview. If they know these 3 things, then like they know kind of like the basics about me and they'll know who I am. And as I would answer the question, I would look down and I'd be like, did I answer this already? Did I give them one of these stories? If not, I'd circle it. Okay, I'm going to practice that, or I'm going to do that one. So kind of going in with here's the things they need to know about me. Practice as much as you possibly can in Photo Booth. I had my brother do a mock interview for me. He was super harsh on me. He was like, what's 256 times 62? And I was like, 8,000. He was like, that was not even close. But getting comfortable being kind of uncomfortable in that just makes it a little bit easier when you're in front of people. Same with the Super Day. I was also in Bangkok at the time, trying to understand what was happening in US markets. The more that you prepare, the more comfortable you're going to feel. And it seems like overkill at the time, but prepare as much as you possibly can. And that is going to allow you to just be so much more comfortable when you're sitting there in front of people. So you can actually work on being engaging, being excited, rather than thinking, what am I going to say next?
Cool. That was a great way to put it. I know you mentioned that to me earlier, but I was just jotting notes down because I found that to be super helpful. This question's for both of you, but so Bridget, feel free to add on after, but I'll start with Emily. Would you say for someone who wants to pursue a career in finance that it's a once in a lifetime experience and to work in New York? Mary Thompson's asking that. Like, do you find that people get to Wall Street like only if they have an internship, or what kind of backgrounds are people coming from in terms of that?
It's funny. I feel like to me, like every job is in New York for finance, but I know I'm like, my husband would joke, I'm like a New York or nowhere type of person at this point. But I think, I mean, it's funny. Like I have friends who have moved back from New York to different places, and it is interesting. And I was actually talking to someone recently, and there are just more finance jobs here than there are in other cities. There are the banks headquarters are here, hedge funds more are here, private equity firms more are here. I mean, venture is more in Silicon Valley, but like, frankly, because of taxes, people more and more have left to places like Austin and such. But, you know, I think that it is such a big thing here that, and it depends on what you want, frankly, I think within it. Like when I worked at JP Morgan, New York is obviously our headquarters, but you'd watch a lot of people who wanted to move to other offices after, you know, 6, 10, 12 years, whatever it may be. And it depends on what you want with your career, frankly. You know, you kind of knew if you wanted to like be at the top, you needed to be in New York. So you'd stay and you grind it out, but it was harder. You work more. Like people in New York work more. It's just, it is what it is. You're going to work a lot of hours. That's life. So you have to be like, okay with that. It's an expensive life. You're doing all this. So, you know, it's once in a lifetime, maybe, but you're also to remember, like, it's even like compared to another, like Chicago, like your rent's probably like 3 times more as someone who's like from the city of Chicago living in New York. It's expensive life. It's a very fast paced life. And you just like, you work a lot. And so just kind of remembering that, even working at the banks, it's like working in Chicago for JP Morgan is very different than working in New York. And so making the decision of what is important to you in life, and those are both fine things. You just kind of need to decide like, what is the right thing for me? And frankly, when you work for those big places, you can transfer offices if you want. Quite often, like I just hired someone who came from JP Morgan and she was originally in the New York office and then she went to the Denver office and we just hired her at Ellevest. So a lot of people transfer around. So if you try one of those things and you're like, I do not want to work in the Dallas office, I want to work in New York, I don't want to work in New York, I want to work in San Francisco, you can often transfer, but some businesses are going to be centered to New York. Like there are some things that's kind of like, if you don't do it in New York, it doesn't exist kind of in the same capacity in other places. And so, you know, it's just kind of recognizing that there just are more finance opportunities in New York than other cities in general.
Well, thank you. Bridget touched upon this earlier a little bit, but Emily, would you say there are any extracurricular skills or like hobbies that are important for an econ major going into the finance field? Like, are there any skills maybe that people should try and seek out on their own?
So I think it really depends. And so I think that's the funny thing that like, I don't think I realized as much when I was in college is like finance is such a broad field. And so I know Elizabeth kind of wrote this in the chat earlier, like I talk to people. Well, I manage a business too, but like in my financial advisor role, I talk to people. Like that's what I do. And so if I don't have those skills to talk to someone, like I run the team well as well. So I hire our financial advisors, I hire our client service people, I hire all these people. I would never hire someone who like didn't have the skills to have those types of conversations in a way that is very relatable. So it's a funny mix that you need to know everything. And if you needed to like be able to explain everything with every bit of detail, but remember that most people don't give a crap about any of that. Like they don't care you to talk about like the PE ratios and looking at, you know, the trends and all these things. And so being able to actually have those conversations. And so when I'm hiring people, I'm kind of like, I need someone who's like smart, but also they can kind of transition to be in that. And that's a very different role versus our investments team. You know, I need someone who's very analytical. I don't really care if they can talk to people or not. You know, they're just going to kind of like, they're sitting there, they're doing all the number crunching, they're doing these types of things. So I just want someone who's going to be very analytical, very focused on attention to detail, especially because we invest people's money. You cannot mess that up. And so, you know, making sure when you are looking at something, you are looking at every detail of that. When you are making a trade, you cannot mess that up. And so attention to detail in there is that job. So I think that just like looking at the skills that you have can be different. And there's just so many different roles within the financial world and kind of figuring out what's right for you and not trying to fit yourself into the box that might not work. I will say in college, I never thought I would be the person who is like client facing and I do like 3,000 panels a week. And in real life, I used to like fly over the country and do like speaking things and this. And like, if you asked me that 10 years ago, I'd be like, no way. Like, I'd rather be an investment banker who crunches numbers all day and does these things, and like life evolves and you kind of like are forced into do things and looking at that. But I think that, just kind of recognizing what your strengths are and kind of diving deeper into those and figuring out how can I actually utilize this to work in finance in the right way. There's like thousands of things you can do in finance. Just finding like the right things for you.
Cool, thank you. Before I ask the next few questions, we are coming to an end. So for the next few questions, they might just be a little rapid fire if possible. This question is for both of you, Bridget, if you want to start. But so often everyone knows what imposter syndrome is. I've definitely experienced it. And I feel like it's definitely something that is common in a position in a field such as you guys. So could you speak to how you dealt with overcoming these challenges?
For sure. And I think it's a really good question. It's often a question that comes up kind of anytime you're like speaking with students, but really anytime you're speaking even with more senior people too. And I think of it from the perspective of, I would oftentimes even still walk into a meeting and everyone is double my age and they're all in suits and I'm like clearly the youngest person there, clearly the only woman, clearly the only Hispanic person there, not always, but often. And I remember like clients have told me before, like, you're the first woman salesperson we've ever had. You're the first like Mexican salesperson we've ever had. And I'm like, okay, like that's great. And it's hard to be kind of the only in a room, like whether that's your racial background, whether that's like your gender, like whatever it may be, it's hard. Having said that, I realized like I have imposter syndrome. My boss has imposter syndrome. My boss's boss has imposter syndrome. So everyone copes with that a little bit differently. What I have found is, and I feel like I've said it a ton, but I prepare. And that is my thing that I do. And I walk into a room or I walk into a call and I'm like, okay, am I the most experienced person here? Perhaps not, but I'm going to be the most prepared person in the room every time I walk in. And for me, that's what makes me feel confident. And that's what makes me feel like I can own it. And that's what makes me walk onto the floor and being like, yeah, I don't know everything, of course, like I'm only a couple of years in, but I'm going to hold the same confidence as though I do. And I'm going to be humble and ask questions and be honest when I don't know the answer, because there's nothing wrong with not knowing and saying, hey, can you explain that a little bit more? But that's my tip is prepare, figure out what works for you. Before meetings, I get kind of nervous and a little bit jittery. I like to play like pump up music. So I kind of like rechannel the nervous energy into being like, oh, I actually think I might be excited, as it turns out. So those would be my two little tips.
Well, yeah, I was actually listening to pump up music right before this because I was a little nervous myself, and it really helped. Emily, Mira's asking, how would you compare your work in traditional banking to asset wealth management, and what have been your favorite aspects of both?
Yep. And I would just say, I just put an article that my company wrote about imposter syndrome. We just published that this week. So if anyone's interested in that, we literally just wrote that this week. So I've kind of lived 3 lives in finance, I would say, just really quickly. Like I worked in commercial banking. So I worked with the largest corporations in America on their lending, these types of things. I was lucky as an analyst. I ended up on a team that I actually got to be client facing. Usually, I did a whole lot of PowerPoint books, a whole lot of like RFP type of things. I spent a lot of time doing that, but, I was able to actually go meet clients, which kind of gave me the thought of that I wanted to do more within there. And so I liked that business. It wasn't very personal. I wanted more personal interaction. It was very, this is very like lingo, but it was all like your relationship was really based on like, are you lead left or lead right on their deal? Which is just, how the companies get their lending. It was a lot of like, I went to a lot of hockey games and Yankees games and Mets games. And, that's like what I spent my life doing. I ate at a lot of steakhouses, all over, a lot of steakhouses. There's only so many days you can eat steak for lunch, I'll tell you, and like eat those like mashed potatoes and things. But it does get old. Like it seems sexy when you're eating out all the time. It really does get old. But then I moved over to asset management, which it's funny, even having worked in 2 different parts of JP Morgan, like the people who work within those groups are very different, like within there. but I liked it more because it was this personal interaction. Like I'm friends with my clients. They have to tell me things. They all send me birthday presents and I send them things, and like we text and we do things like, I went on vacation in Maine this summer and like I met up with one of my clients. Like I stayed at one of my clients' houses in Sun Valley. It's just like a very different relationship that I have with them. And I like that. I like dealing with investments. It is high pressure. Like in times like March and April, when people's accounts are going down like 13% a day, it's quite nerve wracking. You're trying to deal with people being like, am I going to have money tomorrow? And it's not companies thinking about that. It's like, do I have money tomorrow? And so it does get more personal. It does just, you have to, it's really quick business to be doing it. I enjoy it more in doing that. And now I work in a startup life, which is totally different within this. It's like the same thing, but different. But, I think that's even crazier life. I used to get on planes every week and I used to go to California for like a day, come back, do like these crazy life, and do these things. But I think that for me, the client interaction is something I decided I craved. It's not like any more like meaningful work to me. I also just really like investments. Like I like talking about the markets. I like having to know about that stuff. It was something that interested me. I liked, thinking about stocks and bonds and different types of investments. And so for me, it was just the right place when I was looking at, I tried all these different roles.
Well, I love that your clients send you birthday presents. I think it's really nice that you're able to form personal relationships. I feel like when people hear finance, like it just sounds so intense and hardcore. It's like, never thought of it as like a very interactive field. So it's awesome you can do that. I believe Narunen has a question they would like to ask, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Hello. I just had a question for both Bridget and Emily, actually. So I was just wondering, like, just being an economics major, how did you sell yourself to like the finance crowd? I know it may be like a little of a tough test. I don't know. I feel like convince them that you're able to work in banking and whatnot. So yeah, I guess that was my question. And too, sometimes I think like the business school, I feel like the business school at Madison definitely does have a stamp of approval that maybe like econ majors or other majors doesn't get. So how did you kind of like overcome that?
The one thing I will say is I feel like it's a Wisconsin thing that it feels so like econ versus finance, to be honest. I think it's like someone like 50 years ago made this a thing at the University of Wisconsin. It's not a thing in the outside world. Some schools, econ actually sits in the business school. Like no one, when you interview, is going to sit there and be like, you did not sit in the business school. I promise you. Like never would I look at someone's econ from another school and be like, you didn't sit within there. So I think you just need to find confidence in that. It's something weird that I don't know why that is the culture at the university at all. It is not like a second tier thing whatsoever. I actually think in some ways it's actually harder for people. Like think about how many people fail Econ 101 and things. And so I actually think you probably know more and understand the way the world works and things better. And if you want to like work in the markets, frankly, yes, like all those formulas and things matter. You never use those formulas in life. You have calculators and crap that do like all of that stuff. And frankly, you have to like relearn everything, and everywhere is a system and things that does that. And I think having the broader picture, honestly, to me is more helpful. And so just being able to show people what you have and not so much worrying about what other people have and you don't within there, because really like, even though I went to a school and thought about that, probably, when I was doing it, I would never think about that when I was interviewing someone anymore, if they did econ versus finance or things like that.
I'm going to add one quick thing. So first off, I completely agree. I think that this like econ versus business school feels like almost like a rivalry of sorts, which is so funny to me. But once you are interviewing stuff, like people are going to say like, are you a good fit for this role? And dependent upon what the role is, you're probably going to look to see like, are you hardworking? Like, do you really care about this? Are you intellectually curious? And so there's different ways that you explain that. I think having an econ major is really helpful because it helps you kind of see all these big picture things, these kind of smaller details, understanding how to relate the two. Like econ gave me such a phenomenal framework I think that as you're going through internships, like literally write down what are the things that you feel like are your biggest strengths? Like, what are the things that you really, really like about yourself? Like, one of the things that my twin brother used to tell me, which he kind of meant it as an insult, but he was like, Bridget could stand next to a pole and find a way to talk to it. And like, for me, I was like, oh, that's kind of, I don't know if that was a compliment, but now I'm like, oh, wow, you can talk to people. You like talking to people. You can connect with people from different backgrounds, from different companies. Like, now I cover asset managers, private banks, hedge funds, insurance companies, pension funds. And for me, that was a strength that I was able to lean into. And it helped coming more broadly from Wisconsin, because how do you get to know your teacher in a 300 person class? Like, you make yourself known. Like, you have to walk up to the teacher, you have to go to office hours, have to put in kind of the extra work. So I would say, think about, like, write down the things that you're really proud of, the things that you feel like are your biggest strengths, and write down the stories that you can tell to say, hey, here's how I can, like, it's one thing to say, I'm super interested in the markets. That's great. Like, what trends are you interested in? Like, do you follow any news publications? Like, are you invested in the markets yourself? Like, those are the ways that you show, rather than tell somebody I'm qualified. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Emily, I believe in you. Yes, that was the long story short.
Great. Thank you, guys. As much as I would love to continue chatting with you both, it looks like we're at the end of our time. I'd like to ask each of you if you have any parting advice to share on I'm going to restart. Do you have any advice that you'd like to share for students who may want to follow in your footsteps? Bridget, if you want to start.
Yeah, I think, like, when I look back on it, it's like, one, like, do your homework and be prepared when you step into an interview, when you step into a call with somebody, even if it's something like just catching up with a mentor. I think being prepared has been helpful to me. I think, two, explore some things outside of, like, your day-to-day, like take that, like, weird course that you're not sure if it'll, like, get you ahead in your career plans, but you think is really cool. Like, explore kind of different things. And I think, three, just, like, your perspective is your strength, because, like, literally nobody else can have it. So, like, you, Rayana, like, there are so many things about you that are probably different than me. And, like, what's going to make you exceptional at what you do is literally what your perspective is. So the more that you can own it, the more that you can figure out ways to articulate it, the more that you can figure out ways to help other people understand it, like, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, don't be afraid to take risks. I feel like I had put myself in this camp for so long that I also kind of like the finance, like econ thing. I was like, oh my God, I have to work for JP Morgan, because if I don't work for JP Morgan, everyone's going to think like I'm not good at life and this type of thing. And I took a risk, and never did I think, like, when I was 33, that I would run a business for someone who is literally one of the most famous women in finance. Like, I tell people, like, I'll introduce them and people are like, you know Sally Krawcheck? I'm like, yeah, I run a business for her. Like, I literally work with her. I talk to her 100 times a day. And, you know, women all over America would, like, do anything just to, like, speak to her. I'll have her, like, email a client and they're like, oh my God. And I'm like, never did I think that. And never would I have gotten to that point if I didn't take a risk in life. And you know what? They totally could have failed. And I could have gone crawling back to JP Morgan and been like, please take me back. But you know what? They would have taken me back. So it's okay. And it's, you realize, like, if you take a risk, like, things will work out, even if you have to go back to things. But I think just don't be afraid to do things that might be off the path that everyone else goes on, because it can do a lot for you, I think, in life.
One more quick thing I would just say, like, Ellevest is really, really cool. And I, like, signed up for it a little while ago. And also, like, Sally Krawcheck is remarkable. She's written, like, a really cool book, and she puts out these little notes called, like, what the L, and they're really, really cute. And I think too, like, they're things that I look at of, you know, I'm looking at Bloomberg every day. I'm looking at kind of different notes in the morning to get an understanding of, like, what's happening in the market. Like, there's some really, really interesting content on there, and you can literally start investing with, like, $1. So I would also say, so my two takeaways are, go see Elsa and Elizabeth, and go check out Ellevest, because it's really cool.
Thanks.
Cool. Thank you. I learned so much from you guys. I hope everyone got to take away something from this. Thank you both for taking the time to speak with everyone. It was great to hear from two successful, smart women in finance with econ degrees. And thank you to everyone who attended. I hope you learned a lot, and really do reach out to both Emily and Bridget. I know they're great connections, great resources just to even like chat with, even if you don't know what you want to do. And same goes for Elizabeth and Elsa. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Rihanna. You did a great job moderating.
Thank you.